The first explosion of gunfire rolled over the hill like a thunderclap. Lights cut across wet streets. Helicopters thumped the air. In seconds, the quiet of a gray October morning in Rio de Janeiro shattered. Armored trucks pushed into narrow alleys, engines growling. Officers in black helmets shouted into radios. In the favelas of Penha and Complexo do Alemão, a massive raid had begun, what would become Rio's deadliest police operation ever, with at least 64 people killed before noon. It happened just days before the city was set to host global events tied to the UN Climate Summit, COP30. Sirens bled into each other. School bells that should have called kids to class stayed silent. And on one cramped street, a terrified shopkeeper watched as armed men dragged a burning bus across the road to make a barricade aflame. Police and special units, more than 2,000 strong, pushed deeper, hunting leaders and gun crews from the Red Command, one of Brazil's most powerful criminal organizations. Officers spoke in short, clipped commands. Traffickers answered with rifle bursts from high windows and tight corners. Smoke from burning vehicles smeared the sky. A drone buzzed over a rooftop, then dropped something small and hard. An explosion popped in the street like a cruel firework. Radios crackled reports of weaponized drones, burning cars, blocked roads, and intense gunfights. In the chaos, 4 officers went down. The city felt like it tipped on its side. The numbers would shock the world. 64 dead, more than 80 arrested, over 90 rifles seized, and more drugs and ammo than a pickup could carry. By mid-morning, hospitals were jammed. Families waited on sidewalks for news. Doctors moved bed to bed to bed, faces tight with focus. Outside, traffic buckled as buses were hijacked and abandoned sideways to block lanes. Health clinics and schools closed their doors. University exams were postponed. People with normal mornings, coffee, commute, work, found themselves stranded in a city that felt like it had slipped into a war movie. The governor called the city at war. Critics called the operation a massacre. Human rights groups demanded independent investigations. News anchors spoke fast, then paused and spoke fast again, as if they were trying to catch the story before it ran away. And in living rooms across Brazil and far beyond, people watched shaky phone videos from windows and rooftops, armored vehicles grinding up a slope, men ducking behind low walls, a barricade blooming into orange fire. That was the opening picture of this story, raw, loud, and brutal. But to understand how Rio's deadliest police raid happened, and why it happened right before COP30 events, we have to rewind the clock. Earlier, for months, investigators tracked movements in Penha and Alemão, who control which corners, where rifles move, how money flowed. The Red Command had territory and confidence. The police had intel and a calendar. The city was days away from hosting high-profile meetings, C40 climate events, and the Earthshot Prize, with international cameras already in town. History in Rio says big events often bring big operations. This time would be bigger than anyone expected. At briefing tables, commanders laid out maps, tight lanes, footpaths, rooftops that connected like bridges. They listed the targets, leaders if possible, gun teams for sure, stash houses if they could get them. They talked radios and staging areas and how to keep ambulances moving through a neighborhood built like a maze. They also talked about the recent past. In 2021, a raid killed 28 in Jacarezinho, once the deadliest day in the city's policing history. This operation would eclipse it, and no one wanted that sentence to be true. Before dawn, the convoys rolled. Engines low, doors slammed, boots hit pavement. In the half-light, neighbors heard it first. The low tremor of tracked vehicles, the clink of gear, the voice on a bullhorn telling people to stay inside. Then the first crack of rifles and the dull thud of a grenade. The raid was on. Inside the neighborhoods, traffickers reacted fast. Lookouts on rooftops whistled and waved. Radios barked warnings. They're coming from Vicente de Carvalho. They're on the main climb. Block the road. Stolen buses were shoved across intersections. Fuel splashed. Fires took. Thick smoke curled along the street like a living thing. Somebody launched a small drone. 2 more followed. The sound was a swarm. Then the pop of something dropped on a squad car's hood. Officers flinched, then pushed forward, switching routes like running backs, hunting angles that kept them alive. For residents, the morning turned into a long, shaking hour. A mother lay flat on the tile with her 2 sons, counting to 100, then counting again. A baker watched the shelves of fresh Pal Francis go stale, while armor cars idled outside. A bus driver parked against a curb and walked away with both hands up because 2 men with rifles told him to. On the news, anchors said the police had seized dozens of high-powered rifles and arrested scores of suspects. On the street, that looked like men sitting shirtless against a wall while officers zip-tied wrists and kept eyes on rooftops. By mid-morning, the scale was clear. This wasn't a typical sweep. It was a city-shaking push. Officials said 500-plus police and special forces were involved. Warrants numbered in the hundreds. The goal, they said, was to break the hold of top-tier traffickers, not just street sellers. The reality on the ground was messier. Gunmen moved. Families hid. Officers tried to separate shooters from bystanders in lanes where everyone knows everyone and no one trusts anyone with a clipboard. For officers were killed in the fighting. The rest kept moving. The debate started even before the smoke cleared. Supporters of the operation said you can't let a major criminal group run key neighborhoods, not with drones dropping grenades on patrol cars and rifle teams burning buses like matchsticks. They called it necessary, overdue, the cost of restoring order. Critics, residents, activists, rights groups said these raids rarely touch the top bosses, that they devastate black, poor communities, and that the cycle of violence only deepens a fear that kids learn too young. Both sides spoke into cameras. Both sounded sure. The city, still echoing with sirens, didn't sound sure at all. At a hospital near the main avenue, families crowded the entrance. A woman in a gym shirt with blood on her sleeve kept saying, "I was just running. I was just running." Like the words could rewind the morning. In another waiting room, a man in a blue work shirt stared at the floor. He had brought his brother in, then stayed because there was nowhere else to go. Nurses moved with the hard grace of people who don't have time to flinch. The waiting room TV replayed the same clip. Flames in the road, a helicopter banking, an armored truck turning into a smoke-wrapped street. At City Hall, the phones didn't stop. Could schools reopen tomorrow? Were bus routes safe again? What about clinics? And the visitors, diplomats, journalists, business leaders, asking if their events were still on. The answer was yes. The subtext was, "We hope the streets will hold." Rio's governor doubled down at a press conference, saying the state had taken on narco-terrorism and would not back down. The UN Human Rights Office called for investigations. The microphones caught all of it. The streets kept their own counsel. By late afternoon, the gunfire thinned to scattered bursts. The worst of it had burned out, not by agreement, just by exhaustion. Police posts went up on corners where kids usually sell snacks. Fire crews dragged charred bus frames out of intersections. A tired officer carried a seized rifle like it weighed more than metal. On a hill, smoke drifted over the skyline, turning the famous view into a silhouette cutout, beautiful and broken at the same time. And still the count rose. Reporters repeated the number with voices that got quieter each time. 64. 64 people who were alive at sunrise and not by evening. 4 of them police. The rest labeled suspects, though families would argue that word for months. Everyone agreed on one thing. This was the deadliest police raid in Rio's history. The previous record, 28 killed in 2021, was not just broken. It was doubled. The shock of that math made even longtime residents shake their heads. Night fell. The city held its breath. Patrol stayed out. News choppers pointed lenses at dark hills. In living rooms, people spoke softly so they wouldn't wake kids who had finally fallen asleep. On social feeds, arguments flared. Some said force is the only language rifle crews understand. Others said you can't bomb a wound and call it healing. Everyone said, "Be careful tomorrow." At the edge of Penha, rain began to fall. Soft at first, then steady, washing ash off the pavement in gray rivers. A street vendor hosed soot off his cart. A grandmother swept her stoop, because that's what you do when you can't fix the big things. In one lane, a boy picked up a spent casing and turned in his fingers like a coin. On a rooftop, A drone lay cracked beside a broken flower pot, its rotors still for first time all day. And that's where the chapter pauses. The city wet and quiet. The number 64 hanging over the night, like a storm that hasn't finished. Officials promising answers. Families demanding names. And the world's cameras already setting up for next week's events. Just beyond the police tape, a woman in a yellow raincoat lifted her phone to film a corner where flames had been hours before. Out of frame, a radio clicked. "Stand by. We've got movement at the barricade." The officer lifted a hand. Another burst of gunfire cracked the dark.